Hey everyone. Thanks so much to Bon for trusting me with the deep dive today. I'm actually with my family in Canada, so I've pre-recorded it for you just based on the fact that with the time change, it's 5:15 a.m. So if there's anybody over in my North American side, I'm sure you might be looking at this on catch up as well. But I will log into my phone if you have any questions as we go through. I'll be on at 5:15, but I just couldn't do the talk live because I didn't want to wake up everybody around me. So thank you for having me, and I'm really excited to talk about something that I am really passionate about, actually. I am sure you've started to take a look at some of these key concepts in your modules with Bon. But today we're going to look a little bit at our deep dive at the idea of negative self belief and how we can kind of identify them, make sense of them, recognize, ways in which we can move through them. And the key word we're looking at today is reframing our negative beliefs after trauma. We really want to reframe. And I really found this in my own journey very empowering. It was very, you know, I don't know, overwhelming to recognize that a thought is just a thought. And it doesn't have to be true, that I have the ability to challenge it. Because I felt like, growing up, I kind of was working through, I sometimes call it the zombie effect. You just work through life, you have these feelings, we have these experiences, but I've never really stopped to question actually what was true, what is actually something that is right about me or wrong about me, and who says that I am unworthy. But why do I believe this about myself? Why do I have such low self-esteem? And genuinely, it's taken a lot of time to recognize that through neuroplasticity, through the power of recognizing our thoughts, having a language for it now, the magic of like this world we're in with psychology. We absolutely have the opportunity to shift not only how we are, we have the opportunity to shift the patterns in our brain. It takes a while to make those new synapses, but we absolutely have the power to do so. And so today in our session, our key kind of idealizations, the key topics and points, it's firstly to understand negative self beliefs. We're going to look a little bit at the origins, and I'd love for you to reflect upon you and your experiences, maybe kind of how past traumatic experiences have shaped your own self perception. So we're thinking about, when we think about a belief, we're thinking about what you believe about yourself as we walk into this world, as we enter a job interview, as we meet somebody new, as we kind of work through our relationships or parent or whatever chapters of life hats that you wear. It's really important to recognize, how do you show up, and what is it that you're projecting, or what are those feelings that are hidden beneath that. I'm also going to look a little bit at the term cognitive distortions. And I think that that's really important when you think of distortion. It's just the idea of that something is a little bit not as it is, and it's inaccurate. And so we're going to look at what that is a little bit more, how our thoughts might be a little bit shifted in a negative way. And therefore, our beliefs become a little bit more negative, and we can move in the direction of kind of seeing things from a positive place if we continue to do the work and continue to learn and recognize that, there is a cognitive distortion there. Also, let's provide and look at different relatable negative beliefs that maybe other trauma survivors have struggled with. That good old phrase, I am not enough, I'm unworthy, I'm not deserving, I am to blame. All of these phrases, these are limits. These are things that hold us back. And if any of those resonate with you, hold on to those as we work through some of our techniques in terms of flipping and reframing. And when we look at reframing, again, we're just going to look at the language that we're using, looking at how we are viewing things. I almost imagine like these glasses, right? So if you've got some glasses on, maybe they're like a kind of a color, and you're not seeing things as clear as they can be. You're seeing them through almost shaking people's hands and mentally thinking, I'm not good enough. Hey, nice to meet you, I'm unworthy. that sort of experience. And I definitely have been somebody in that place before. So we're going to look at things that are holding us back, often based on our trauma, our past, and how we can work through it. So the oranges of our negative self-belief. So past traumatic experiences often are your number one thing, but especially anything that involves emotional, physical, or psychological harm, it can really last in terms of the imprint it makes on your self-perception, what you believe about yourself, your self-esteem. And trauma can shatter our sense of safety and trust, and that kind of leads to feelings of being like powerlessness. So sometimes we make decisions because there's a belief that, oh, well, it doesn't matter, I'm not worthy anyway. And it also puts us in a place where we maybe could be vulnerable. And these experiences can create maybe that negative, again, thought. Maybe we don't see what actually happened as clearly as it was. Maybe we blame ourselves for something. We experience, the shift from, guilt, maybe if we've made a decision that doesn't feel aligned. So guilt is this feeling where you did something against your own like personal values or what you believe in, and shame is when you start to believe like I am unworthy, I am not good enough. And when it shifts from like I did something wrong and I can learn from it to actually that is who I am as a being, as a person, and that's how I'm now going to present in the world, it really shifts everything. So we need to dig a little bit deep, because anything that feels shameful, anything that's living a little bit in the darkness, I'd imagine sometimes that's where I imagine shame like lives in the dark. Sometimes those are the things we never share with people, and those are the things that are deeply shaping our self-beliefs. And so this is great. If anything's coming up for you in our thoughts and our conversations, I would highly recommend when you have your next one-to-one with Bon or your next coaching session, you could always bring this up and kind of unpack a little bit more of that self perception. But the experiences that we have can create these like feelings and these beliefs, but they can be highly inaccurate. People might be looking at you thinking like, wow, that person is everything I want to be, and actually you're living inside of you feeling that you're not good enough. And we need to kind of work on that, because, life is way too short. We've got so much to live for, so much joy. You're on this program, you're on this journey because you're looking for a shift. You're looking to feel better in some way, shape, or form. So we need to start seeing and believing that these changes can happen. But yeah, a person who's experienced, if I gave you an example, maybe childhood abuse, they might develop a belief that they might be inherently unlovable and maybe even deserving of mistreatment. Of, a lot of people that I've worked with, that it almost feels safe to be mistreated because that's what they know, and that fits in with this self-belief. But actually wanting to break that cycle and knowing that you're worthy of much more is something that can be worked on, and something that can be believed, and something that can be lived, and it's time to start going, hey, I'm going to start fighting for myself as if I'm fighting for my best friend, or I'm fighting for, my child, or somebody that really is important for me. I want you to have a voice and be your own champion, going, hold on a minute. And when we talk about reframing, that's a quick little style of this idea of championing, challenging what it is that you're thinking. Let's start questioning, actually, is that just a really negative thought based on how somebody else treated me? Or is that true about me? Well, what's true about you is what you choose. And who you want to show up to be is what we choose. So let's try and choose some of those healthier thoughts. Let's try and recognize like that's a negative thought. That's coming from my backstory. That is not who I am. All right. And even if you've been caught in this a long time, no worries. I, for one, was there. It took a lot of work and time, but even just recognizing and seeing that a thought is just a thought, and we can change it. We can choose something different. We can make a switch. It absolutely is empowering. And it gives us that word I said earlier, we often feel powerless when we have these like deep, dark, negative self-beliefs. But if we can pull ourselves out and we can recognize like, actually, like there is power in this, and I'm not going to let a thought, totally overwhelm the rest of me. I'm going to start to kind of step in and be present. and smile and show up in my best self. You absolutely can do that. So amazing. Anyways, another example, maybe someone who might have survived a toxic relationship, they might internalize a belief that they are responsible for the abuse that they endured. I definitely, this is very common. Well, it was my fault, or somebody who, might have been taken advantage of, thinks that, well, I dressed that way, maybe I was flirty, I drank the alcohol, so maybe I brought on that moment of that was not consensual. That is a belief that has been created to cope, and these are not bad things. What the brain does, the reason why we've created these beliefs, is because that's what the brain thinks that is going to make us feel good to survive. It's trying to keep us safe, it's trying to kind of get through and survive, but it doesn't mean that in the long term those habits feel good, and we need to kind of shift that. So again, that negative self-belief is acting like a defense mechanism, and that's trying to help us understand and navigate anything that's traumatic, but often they sometimes do a little bit more harm when we kind of get down the line in the long run. And so it's great to kind of take some time to just sit with this, sit and listen, see what comes up for you. Maybe have a piece of paper out. It might feel really good to just write down anything that you kind of starting to feel is sticking out for you. If anything resonates, you might start to be able to kind of pin down what maybe your limiting belief or beliefs are. And once you can name it, that's our very first one. So I'm going to go through a bit more theory, but if you can get through some of the theory, you're starting to be able to recognize, name one or two of maybe these limiting beliefs that might be holding us back, then we can start working through it. And sometimes it takes more coaching to get there, but finding and figuring out how you're showing up is super, super empowering as well, because you can go, oh yeah, I'm human. My brain has done that. Remember this. My brain has done that in order to keep me safe, to help me survive that experience. But I don't need that thought at the moment in that way. I need to reframe that thought. And that's what we're going to keep working through. So coming back to our theory, I spoke at the start when I gave you an overview, we were going to talk about what a cognitive distortion is. And I'm sure you've got kind of the idea now. It's just the wrong way to think, or a way to think that is different than what the truth is. It is distorted. And we often see ourselves in such a different way than what the world does. It's it always blows my mind, even like when I'm in a spiral of negative thinking, whether it's about my body image or whatever, the world doesn't even notice. And all I'm doing is like ruminating, and ruminating is just continuing to think over and over and over about the same situation. There's a cognitive distortion, and it's a faulty way of thinking, but it magnifies and reinforces these negative beliefs that we have created over time. They're like cognitive filters. That color, like I kind of said about those glasses, how we perceive ourselves, others, the world around us. And these distortions can further kind of entrench negative self-beliefs by distorting reality. It makes us see things through this like very, very different lens. And I just think it's really important to notice that the word distortion is showing us, it's telling us, in a psychology, in research, we're looking and going, hey, my thinking is a little bit off. And it's important for us to now challenge. When you hear that little voice, almost imagine that you are a fly on the wall in your thoughts. You can do it as we work through this content. You can do it on your own while you're lying there in the quiet. Often before bed is my time where I ruminate. But I want you to think a little bit about what is coming up for you, and just listen. And when a negative thought passes, can you just kind of hold a minute and look at the thought and be like, hey, that's just a thought. And I need to reframe you, because I don't want you kind of being all I'm thinking and the way that I'm showing up now. But some of the common cognitive distortions, let's see if you resonate with any of these ones. So from psychology, from research, there's black and white thinking. And that's viewing situations in extreme terms with no middle ground. So you're either perfect or a failure. I definitely can resonate with that in my life. I've always used to describe myself as an extremist, like either like full of energy, bringing all the love, bringing all the light, like, hey, I'm showing up. Sometimes I'm faking it till I make it. And then if not, I'm like quietly, shutting down in the dark. Nobody needs, I'm a failure. And that's just who I am and what I'm going to be. And I need to sit in that. The highs and lows can be very extreme, and that can be that black and white thinking. Another common distortion could be catastrophizing, which is very common, often based on traumatic events, but assuming the worst possible outcome will occur all the time. So even in small things, like if I make a mistake, my whole life will be ruined. I remember as a kid, it's such a vivid memory for me. I had always been told, like, don't litter, be a good person, blah, blah, blah. And based on my trauma, I had created this limiting belief that I needed to be perfect. And if I could be perfect forever for everybody, then what happened was something that would just disappear, and I could just like make it up to the world as such. There was a lot of work to be done, but as a kid, I created this limiting belief that like I needed to be perfect. And my vivid memory is we were, I forget, somewhere with my family, and we had like a juice in like a juice carton. I think it was an apple juice. And I had left it on the side, got up and like wherever I'd left, I remember thinking like I didn't take that with me. I didn't put it in a bin. And I remember for days feeling this overwhelm, like an anxiety, lying there as a small child before bed. And I was catastrophizing. It was like my world is going to end. Someone's going to find out like that I'm a terrible person. And I was sitting there with this wild negative self-belief, full fight or flight response, not even realizing obviously till an adult, but I can recognize that moment. It's a very vivid few nights where I would sit in the quiet and I was feeling shame. I was feeling this deep, deep limiting belief that, being perfect, if I wasn't, then, what was I? And I think that that's something to challenge, because there's so many questions we could, I think I've done whole sessions on perfectionism, but catastrophizing is a thing. And if you recognize or resonate with any of that, remember it's normal. Again, this is another outcome where your body is like trying to survive, get us through these like tough things, make sense of whatever we've experienced, but it doesn't have to be something that we get stuck in forever. And we can move through that. And it's definitely something I can say that doing this work, doing some of the reframing, continuing to learn, finding the information on why you might feel a certain way, why we are the way we are, really helps make sense of everything. The next one is personalization. So that's when you believe, so you take everything personally. So you believe that everything is your fault, even if it's not. So that breakup was entirely my fault. I messed up. It was all my fault. It was all me. I shouldn't have, done this. And you start to beat yourself up for it. That's personalization. Maybe you have a relationship, maybe there's a friendship or another relationship where you might feel when that phone rings, you pick it up straight away because for fear, like, what have I done wrong? Oh, oh, sorry, I thought I had to sneeze. It might creep up on me in a bit. Who knows? But that idea of like, well, what have I done wrong, when actually they're just phoning to say hello? But there's this fear, and you have to pick up the phone straight away, and your stomach's flipping, and you're in fight or flight, and we start to kind of mix catastrophizing with personalization. Um, and overgeneralization, as well as like applying all a negative experience to all aspects of life. So I failed at this task, so I'm a failure in general. I failed in this relationship, so I'm now unworthy of love forever. And we really need to recognize that that is all distorted. It's cognitive distortion. Nothing, everybody is deserving. Everyone deserves love, and everyone is worthy of great things. Everyone is worthy of joy and all those things that you seek in your life, no matter what has happened, and it is time to start to let go of some of that as we recognize it. Again, I've given you quite a few examples like I am unworthy, I'm to blame, I'm not enough. But some of the other ones trauma survivals grapple with in terms of negative beliefs are maybe I am unsafe. So sometimes, like carrying that constant sense of threat or danger from past events, like leading to this sort of hypervigilance and anxiety. So maybe like a fear of running into somebody, or you just constantly feeling unsafe, so moving through life in that really tight chested fight or flight experience all the time, and that's something like I can absolutely relate to. Another limiting belief could be I am broken. um, I've definitely heard that many times, like maybe flippantly, like, oh, I'm broken. But actually, that is a limiting belief. It's viewing oneself as irreparably damaged. I'm damaged goods. I'm bringing baggage that you can't, handle into a relationship. And maybe that makes it hard because we are almost kind of deciding that you are the trauma that you experience versus it being something that has happened in the past and that you are on a journey towards working through and finding ways to make peace with that experience. And so it will hinder, or make it very difficult to see a path to recovery if you are feeling like, well, I am broken. But well done you for all being on this course, because it means that even if you resonate with some of these emotions and feelings or these limiting phrases, that recognizing it is probably the hardest battle, finding the vocabulary to make sense of what's holding us back, and then we're able to kind of work through that. So here's your moment. If you have a pen and paper, you can do it in your head. I'm not necessarily I always say, probably it's quite often that sometimes I like to write for days and sometimes I'm not, like a big journaler, and I recognize not everybody's a big writer. So maybe you could write in the middle of your page just limits, something like along the lines like a little circle, and you can just like mind map anything so far that's come up to you. You can kind of stop the recording. But I want you just to think about like what's come up for you. Is it any of these phrases, any word like unworthy, I blame myself, I feel shame, I am not enough, I never feel safe? Are these feelings and things that stick out to you? And then can you just reflect a little bit on where these come from? Maybe here are some journaling thoughts or questions again to add around your mind map, or you can write it out. But what are your limiting beliefs is your first question. What are those things that sticking with you? How are you showing up? Where do these come from is my next journaling question. So where do the thoughts come from? Where do they root? How did they start? Can you find that? And that's digging a little bit deeper. And again, if it feels a lot to have that conversation with yourself right now, even just write down the journaling questions and bring them to the table in your next kind of coaching or therapy sessions. These are great things to bring to the table. You can have some time to, think about them. But then the next question here is, how did I continue to, you know, how can I continue to kind of change my thinking? So, what I mean by that is, if these are your beliefs, this is where they root. Can you almost look at your situation on your piece of paper and ask yourself, if this was your friend, not you, are you able to see that, where this comes from doesn't necessarily define you? And can you find a way? What can you do? What do you need to change in order to shift this process? Can you see in that picture of your thoughts where they root, where they started? And can you start to recognize, imagine like this is like your best friend, your child. Can you see in there anything in there that you need to change in order to stop that process? Whether it's just like challenging the thought, maybe it's getting a piece of paper, and anytime you're laying there and you're in like one of these, like I call it the snowball effect, my brain is going off, I'm thinking negatively, then you're able to kind of take a moment to write it down, get it out. Maybe that's a really great way to kind of shift, get out of your head onto a piece of paper, something like that. What do you need to change now to stop this process is your big question. You know, we've refined these negative self-beliefs, they've become us. What do we need to do to change that process? And this is it, it's thinking about a little bit deeper, you know, this is, I suppose, just helping you to explore and define how your personal trauma has shaped these beliefs and recognizing the role in your cognitive distortions. You're putting down on paper, maybe it feels heavy, just keep it, really soft and gentle in what you're putting on down, but you're just recognizing right now, we're talking about a cognitive distortion, and you are putting this on a piece of paper because you can see, this is exciting, you can see that this is a distortion. This is not a truth. Okay. And you can start to challenge it. You can start to look at it and see it from a different point of view. This is what's in my head, but actually, I'm going to start shifting this. I'm going to start moving this. And if this was my best friend, I would be telling her, like, that's not your fault. You're not to blame. Or, you know what? We're human. We make mistakes. We can learn from them. We can move on from them. There's so much in it. So I genuinely just wanted to say, like, you've got this. And I truly believe the power of like words to paper. I really, really do. I think that getting it out of your head gives you a whole new way of looking at it, and it detaches it a little bit from you. You then have this piece of paper when you're able to go, okay, this is my situation. This is, my best friend's situation. How does this look? What needs to change? And if you can't see it, you're struggling with what needs to change, take that piece of paper into your next session. And I've got this little theory to kind of bring to the table. I don't know if anybody's ever seen this. I happened to come upon it through a podcast that was presented by Stephen Bartlett, and he does Diary of a CEO, but I think that he referenced it from somewhere else. But his analogy, you can look it up, the spider analogy if you wanted, but I'm just going to show you here. That's my terrible spider. So I've drawn you a spider, and I want you to imagine this spider is like crawling across the page. Okay. A real spider, not my fake one. And what the experiment did was they took a piece of a piece of paper. They had the spider crawling around the piece of paper, and then they made a big black circle around the spider. Okay. And when you look at that big black circle, what happened, do you think, when the spider was crawling across the piece of paper? I suppose, do you think that he stopped at the line? It's just a line, it's not an actual barrier. Or do you think that he continued to recognize it's just a piece of paper, I can walk where I want? This is a cognitive distortion. This spider with that like black line, if you watch the video clips, quite interesting. He goes and he stops around that black line. And it's almost like he believes that there's a big barrier around him. And it kind of starts to go in a circle, feeling like that spider is trapped. And I think that that's a great metaphor for how our limiting beliefs, they almost keep us inside these bubbles. They keep us in a space where this often feels safer to stay here. But actually, there's a whole lot of space, a whole world, an environment, everything around us. But our limiting beliefs are sometimes making us feel a little bit suffocated in the way that we approach the world, maybe our ability to try new things, our ability to form strong relationships. It's different for everybody. And so I just wanted you guys to see that little bit of a spider. I'll see if I can link it up, but if not, have a little Google, Stephen Bartlett, Diary of a CEO, spider analogy. It should come up for you. But anyways, that's the kind of concept there. But I loved it. I just thought that it resonated with me in so many aspects of life, and especially talking a little bit of these processes today. Just thinking a little bit about ourselves and how our past has brought us to a place of who we are and how we view ourselves today. So awesome. So this takes me to the strategy. and how we then can reflect on how do we reframe our thoughts. And so there are five steps, and we'll spend a lot of time looking at step number 5. But briefly, I've got them written down for you. One is to identify. So we've started to think about it. We're looking at cognitive reframing, and cognitive reframing is your technique, and it involves examining. So we're going to look, we're going to alter the way we interpret and respond to the situation, thought, and emotion. And it's kind of like looking at a painting from a different angle. We're going to try and discover new details, perspectives, and by engaging in this kind of reframing process, hopefully we can break free of that grip, I suppose, these beliefs have on us. Maybe we can recognize that that's just a little line that we can pass through. So number 1 is identify. We've been kind of working towards that with theory. Theory is the best way to identify anything in terms of our psychology and who we are. But identify that negative belief, our number 1 hardest thing. It's recognizing that it is a belief. It's just a thought. I can change it. It's a pattern. It's a habit. I always say that even happiness itself is a habit. I feel like joy, it's a choice. And sometimes that's hard to believe, sometimes we wait for it all to come to us, but actually it's our beliefs. We are what we think. I hear that phrase all the time, but it really is true. And we have the opportunity to make a new choice. Might be hard. We might slip back into those old habits, but there's always ways to pull us back. And every strategy, every theory helps us. And as we identify it, we want to recognize, if we can recognize in our heads, here's my belief, then all of a sudden your head's going to start recognizing a little bit more. I'm thinking in this negative pattern, just by saying it or writing it down. And if you can pick out what your negative belief is that you would like to reframe, that would be amazing. Write one down or choose one that you kind of can connect with that we've talked about, and see if you can work with me in the process of the 5 steps. But it's often that belief that's automatic, and it arises in response to maybe a trigger or a specific situation. Again, maybe I am unworthy. Second, number 2, we need to explore evidence. You almost have to imagine, be like, okay, there's my thought. It's creeped up. And now I'm going to look at it under a magnifying glass, and I'm going to have a little look and actually just see, like, what is this? I'm going to start to reflect a little bit more and investigate, because it's just a thought. So once you've identified the negative belief, take a closer look at the evidence that supports and contradicts it. All right. So I love this one. Sometimes I like to, again, a little piece of paper exercise. You can draw a little line. Maybe you can fold it in half. But I want sometimes put what supports, anything that supports this view, and anything that contradicts. Pardon me for my messy writing, but anything that supports that view and anything that contradicts it. So I am unworthy. Well, what supports that view? And I want you to ask yourself questions like, what experiences have contributed to this belief? What supports it? What tells me that I'm unworthy? Sometimes when you really deeply think about it, you have way more on the contradicts list if you actually started to write that down. Again, are there any instances that challenge this belief? Is there anything in that side that you can write on the contradict side that really goes, hey, maybe that's not actually that true. Maybe that's just what somebody else made you feel, and maybe thinking about how this belief is impacted on thoughts, emotions, actions. See if you can kind of feel that out. And if you look at that list, you might like that. You might just be a mental exercise, something to reflect upon. But I feel like if you look at it and challenge that thought, is it really true that I'm unworthy? Very often you just can't find evidence that supports it that much. It's only that you are made to feel that way because of a certain trauma and situation. So we're starting to kind of break it down and unpack it there. Step 3 is generate alternative thoughts. And I like to call this one the flip method. I think Bond does as well. But I want you to imagine that you flip your thoughts. So you might have, sometimes it works with like an elastic band around your wrist. You can flip it to the other hand. But I like to imagine myself, no, like when I'm thinking negatively, maybe I'm in the workplace or something, I'm going, no, like you are like good enough. You've got this. And then you take that bracelet and flip it. And I'm like, okay, I'm trying to speak to myself, almost coach myself, think about like a sports coach and be like, no, you are able, you can do this. It's like I talk to myself sometimes. I'm flipping. I recognize I'm thinking negatively and I flip the thought. So if your phrase was, I am unworthy, then I want you to flip it and say, like, I have inherent worth. My value is not determined by my past experiences. We want to flip the language, rather than, again, it's not I am unworthy. It is I am worthy. I'm deeply worthy. My value is not determined by my past. Same with if you don't feel enough, you never feel like you're good enough. I am enough just as I am. I'm doing my best. And again, that value is not determined by your past experiences. You are enough just as you are. We need to use that flip method. So when you hear one thing, you have to write the next, and that creates a real positive affirmation. It shows your brain that, hey, I'm starting to challenge this. Sometimes it can be a habit that's created slowly over time, that when a negative thought pops up, then you have this other narrative going on in your head that starts to challenge it, being like, no, flip that, flip that. You're in this like process of thinking negatively. You're in your old limits. Let's reflect, let's flip it. So trying to find the opposite, and again, that's where kind of writing things down helps, or in your head, find the opposite of what you're saying. Find a positive phrase and start to say it to yourself. Maybe have it on the background of your screen on your phone, or write it on a post-it. It might sound cheesy. Put it on a mirror, even if it is that you want to write these things to people around you, but as reminders for you too. I often I've got small children, so I find myself writing sometimes the reminders that I need to hear, but to my children. So my daughter's mirror, I'm saying like, you're beautiful inside and out, things that I'm trying sometimes to believe in myself. Or I'll say, you can do hard things, because sometimes those are thoughts that, like, I can't do it, I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy of that. You can do hard things, you deserve, joy. And I start to flip that, and I write those things out so that they're around the house, and the reminders, not just for, maybe it's quietly, it makes it look like it's for my children, but actually for me, I'm reading those going, yeah, I need to remember that too. I want to lead in that way. And so that's a really great way to flip that method, flip the thinking, have those positive phrases available to read again, because we're starting to fire and rewire. We're changing the structure of the brain. It just takes time to actually make like a brand new synapse. And a lot of like the work we do is trying to just totally shift the way that we are thinking from that negative pattern into something that feels a little bit more positive, a little healthier, and in a way that will help us kind of, break through that invisible, line. I think that spider analogy is just perfect, isn't it? We need to kind of find our way to see that that's actually not real, that you can continue to walk and breathe and be, that we put this around us, and it's just a thought. Okay. And finally, the next one is number 4 is challenging then the distorted thinking. So not only is it flipping it, so generate an alternative thought, is find the opposite, but then you can really challenge it. And this step involves pinpointing and addressing cognitive distortions that might be amplifying the negative beliefs. So that's going back to the theory we looked at and going, hang on, I'm catastrophizing. So coming back to that space, hang on, I'm black and white. I'm in a place where I'm like I'm in my extremism stage. Hold on a minute, I'm personalizing this when I don't need to. I'm in process of personalization that is based on my past. That is, that's what I'm doing. So we challenge the distortion and say, hey, that's normal. I'm doing that. I'm trying to protect myself, but I don't need that right now. And I don't need that anymore. And reminding yourself, that you can challenge that, and you can kind of adopt a new perspective here. And so number 5 is this great space where you practice self-compassion. And I think that that's a hard one. But self-compassion, I've been trying through some of the concepts. We're looking at your situation from like a best friend point of view. That in itself is starting that thought of kind of reframing in a self-compassionate way. So that is just being kind to yourself. The phrase that I use all the time that helps me personally is like, Megan, you're only human. You're only human. And it's okay that you think and you feel. And it's okay that you think and feel in different ways. And it's okay if you need to work on shifting that habit. It's okay, you are human and your brain's just doing its best to help you, protect you, etc. I love that phrase. You're only human. And that's it. I'm just being human. You're not doing anything wrong. There's nothing wrong with your thoughts. There's nothing wrong with you guys. Like, let me make that very clear. It's just over time we formed habits like biting our nails or the way that we like to put milk in our tea. It's a habit and we have the opportunity to make new shifts and choices. Just like you can, if you worked hard, you can not have sugar in your tea anymore. We can train ourselves. But one of the hardest and the most important ways is to treat yourself with the same empathy and understanding you would that friend. And I really want you to kind of come back to this all the time. You need to repeat this like thought that you are like, you matter, you know like be really kind to yourself and acknowledge that it's okay to struggle with negative beliefs, and keep reminding yourself with kindness. Remember that you created this kind of process, and it might have come from what felt like credible sources at the time, like parents, family members, close friends. We now recognize that that was not maybe good for us. And so I want you to think a little bit about this as well. It's not going to happen overnight. We have to kind of do some undoing, unbecoming. Because if you did ask yourself sometimes, like, how long is it taking you to build up these negative distortions? Then how long will you in kindness give yourself to work on changing maybe your top, 2 or 3 distortions? And genuinely, if you're looking at it, like 6 months is a good aim. 6 months, continuing the work, continuing to think about it, you might start to really feel that shift. It takes a long time to build a new synapse in the brain, but it is possible. And synapses mean that like the brain is starting to shift a thinking pattern for the long term. But you've got it. You've got this. So yeah, I wanted to really just bring to light that I think we all have like some level of a limiting belief in our lives. But not everybody has an opportunity to sit and recognize that this is something that we might be experiencing. And if I think about it, talk about it, break it down, then I genuinely have the ability to, walk and show up in this world, in our relationships, maybe in a more peaceful way, I like to say, rather than maybe in that fight or flight stress response all the time. But let's just make it really real that cultivating self compassion and some positive talk is huge. I genuinely believe in the power of giving yourself a pep talk, having conversations with yourself. It sounds, we're always thinking, we live in our head and our thoughts. So why can't we sit there and go, no, hold on, you've got this. You have the ability to make a difference. I can change. I have the power, I have the strength, the tools, the motivation, the people around me that I want to do this for. Like, let's reframe this, and when you are having those arguments with yourself, or those negative self-talk, or that real low mood, just recognize that you have the ability to shift and pull yourself out of that a little bit. But yeah, I just practice being kind to yourself. really practice it. Especially when you have like a challenge or a setback, be kind to yourself. Try not to berate yourself. Give yourself encouragement and understanding. Be gentle with yourself. I remember somebody once said to me in one of my coaching sessions years ago that if you go to bed at night and say that you've done your best today, then that's all you can ever do. But your best changes. And I think that this was empowering. Sometimes your best that day is just getting out of bed and having a shower. And other days, your best is performing at the highest level and being the most incredible, whatever role you play. I'm thinking, I've got children, so the most incredible present parent. And then other days, you're like, I just, you know, I'm really struggling today. But even if your best was just something simple like getting up and you practice some level of self-compassion, as long as you did your best in that moment and be compassionate that your best can change, then you might be able to find yourself in a little lovely healthy space. And mindfulness techniques help. I've worked a lot on that in module 3 of your program, but we'll keep coming back to those, whether it's a deep dive or well-being Wednesdays. Affirmations, like we said, positive statements. If you ever find like positive quotes, if you're somebody who uses social media, maybe see if you can start following pages that have like positive quotes, and then save or screenshot some of those positive phrases and flick through them. Keep them close, type them out so that you got space just when you're feeling lower to read them, and start to kind of find time to recognize phrases like I'm resilient and I'm capable of healing from my past. I'm present and worthy, all of it. Anything that resonates with you and your situation is genuinely wonderful. And I think that will help. So I could be here all night. Self-compassion in itself is probably a whole topic. But I really hope that this has given you a little bit of a deep dive in to the world of trauma, and kind of empowers you to work towards this space of transformation. See if you can begin the process or continue with the work that you're doing in this program to kind of reframe those negative beliefs after your trauma. I believe in you. You need to believe in you. You've got this. That's it. Peace and love, my friends. Yeah, I hope to see you again soon. Wellbeing Wednesday is probably the next time you'll get me. So have a good one. All the best, team.